Talk about Brazil.
Well,
why did you go there?
Initially, it was just an emotional response to the fact that I'd invited this writer who I deeply admired to come and see my play. And you know, people like me in show business, we're show-offs. And I wanted him to see the play. And he kept not appearing in the audience. And eventually I realized he was not able to return to the United States because of having received the NSA papers. And on impulse, I said, well, we'll bring the play to you. And my colleagues, I went to Deborah Eisenberg and Larry Pine, who were the two actors in the play with me, and to the sound designer, and Bruce Odland, and the director, Andre Gregory, and they all said, before I'd even finished the sentence, they all are old rebels from the 60s, you could say, and immediately said, what a great idea. So we brought the whole play to Brazil, and we did it for Glenn and some people he invited. We rented a theater, and our lighting designer, Jennifer Tipton, talked to the people in Brazil, and we did the complete version of the play. Because, you know, you can't email a play. Plus, it's going to be a play. That's what you have to do. So it was a gesture of expression of respect for the fact that he did what we all should be doing. He's risked his neck. He's risked his physical security and freedom.
And the choice of the play, Designated Mourner, the reason of its relevance to our time, because the play has been out now for more than a decade, right?
Yes. Well, it happens to be a play that is on the subject of speaking out, in a way. I mean, you know, one writes out of a personal artistic impulse that you don't necessarily plan, but it turns out that this play is about a writer, played by Larry Pine, who wrote quite a while ago some essays that were offensive to the regime, the sort of right-wing regime in this made-up country. And he and his loyal daughter, played by Deborah Eisenberg, are not even gathering guns for the rebels. They're simply people who are sympathetic to the poor of their country and have written essays. So they haven't really done anything. And yet, as the political space in the country gets smaller and the regime begins to crack down, the people who are on the fringes are threatened, because artistic freedom of thought is dangerous freedom of thought, just the way political freedom of thought is. If people are out there thinking on their own, that's dangerous to governments if they are repressively minded. And so it becomes dangerous for the son-in-law, me, my character, to live in the house with these rather dangerous people, or people who are mildly dangerous because they're thinking freely. So I get out of the house. I play the survivor who is basically cowardly.
So this is what you did in Brazil for Glenn Greenwald and a couple dozen of his closest friends. Could you perform a section of the play for us now, of The Designated Mourner?
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know what to pick, but I'll pick a... Can I do a couple of minutes of it? Yes. All right. So this is my character, a somewhat light-minded, slightly shallow guy who accepts evil ultimately, really, and is cowardly. So anyway, now we come to the question of enemies, you see, and that is a question that we really have to face. I mean, when people refer to the enemy, our enemies, they're referring basically to what someone once called the snarling, snapping, unmuzzled dogs, or in other words, the individuals who live, so to speak, outside the fence, the ones who are camped on the other side of the fence with their campfires, their pots, their marshmallows, or whatever the hell they have over there. In other words, you see, if you look at the world as a whole, actually, most people in it are the ones we can only refer to rather nervously and gingerly by means of those terribly melodramatic and almost hysterical words like wretched, miserable, unfortunate, desperate, powerless, poor. That's a very sympathetic one. Or in other words, they're people, God bless them, who simply have no resources of any kind at all. And these particular people, and you know, God knows why, they just don't like us. They don't like us. They simply don't like us. So it's not hard to see what'll happen one day. There's the majority, them, the minority, us, and the way they feel about us, great dislike. Very, very great dislike. So enemies are not exactly imaginary beings. They're very, very real. But I'll tell you something interesting about enemies. You see, at least this is how I feel about it. I'm sure you know that rather nasty and not terribly thought-provoking old saying that the enemy of my enemies is my friend. Well, what's much more true to my sense of life is that the friend of my enemies is for sure my enemy. Even though in a funny way, my enemies themselves don't bother me that much. And at various moments, I can even work up quite a bit of respect for them, looking at it all from a certain point of view. It's that thing of people whom you actually know and with whom you actually live, deciding consciously to become the friend of your enemies that can get you really terribly upset because your enemies are trying, after all, very hard to kill you, no matter what you may happen to feel about them. And this is where things with my wife and my father-in-law really became so difficult, because they'd worked themselves around to being so horribly appalled by the selfish rich people with bad taste whom they saw encroaching everywhere on their perfect existence, that they ultimately decided that the people whom they actually ought to like were, yes, that's right, precisely the ones who were sitting around making plans to slice our guts out, or in other words, to perform that gesture cleverly referred to by our enemy-loving writers as the disemboweling of the overboweled.
Wallace Shawn performing The Designated Mourner, and he performed that for Glenn Greenwald in Brazil. Will you be going to Russia to perform it for Edward Snowden?
Well, I don't know him, you know. We're not... Glenn, I know a little bit.